Well, hello. Welcome back, everyone, to Human Capital Management Impact. This is Brad Boyson joining you from Dubai. And consistent with our theme to connect the world together, we have a guest today who's joining us from Australia. Sabrina, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great. It's great to have this chat and catch up. And I think now, with we had Shinsuke, we've got Australia, we've got North America, we've had Europe. So I think we've got, depending on how you count continents, I think we've got 80% covered right now. So we're doing good.
And you're going around the world during COVID. Well done.
Yeah, yeah. What we do at the outset too, and I think it's important for our audience as well, is maybe just give a brief introduction about yourself, your name, your background, and maybe link that to this TC260 ISO 30414 standards project. How did you get involved? So first, about you.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Sabrina Pit. As you said, I live in Australia, studied in the Netherlands, so have a European background as well, but I've been in Australia for about 20 years. So I'm the founder of Workvisor International, which is a consulting company that focuses on work, health and aging and education. I also work for the New South Wales Rural Doctors Network as a knowledge and information translation analyst. And the New South Wales Rural Doctors Network is a rural workforce agency. So we look at how can we retain people in the bush for longer who work in the primary healthcare space. And before that, I worked at the University of Sydney and the University of Western Sydney as a researcher, particularly focusing on workforce research and in the health sector. I think your next question was around how did I get involved?
TC260, how did you get involved in this? I mean, it's interesting for me to see the diversity of backgrounds that people have come to.
Yeah.
And listening to your introduction, I'm curious to know, how did you get involved in this TC260?
Well, funnily enough, it actually started in Finland when I went to a work health and safety conference.
Interesting.
And got in touch with people from the Netherlands who talked about sustainable employability. And I'd never heard of the concept, but because I was working at that point in time and how do we keep older people at work, I started talking to them. And so after that, I did a trip back to the Netherlands and visited several companies that were active in the sustainable employability field in the Netherlands. I then got in contact with the Dutch standards body, and I can't recall how that happened, but they said they told me about the standard that they were developing or that they planned to develop. And it happened to be that ISO was meeting in Rotterdam when I was there. It was literally just, luck. And so I went to that meeting and that's where it started. So I got involved with developing the sustainable employability standard initially. And yeah, pretty much haven't left since, a little bit more active sometimes than other times, depending on how busy things are.
No, I think that's the history of a lot of the members of this group, myself included, is, I've used this expression a couple times in these interviews, is, it's a journey, not a destination. And I think that's also part of the strength of this process is the ISO standards require refreshing, with updating on a regular cycle. And for people who are new to this type of intellectual property sort of knowledge management methodology, that is also one of the big strengths of this process.
Yeah, I agree. So, because that so the sustainable employability is actually a technical report at the moment.
Right.
So I'm very keen to it needs updating now. So I'm trying to get a new group of people together that potentially want to work on that one in the near future. But that's still under discussion. But if anybody on the call here is interested in sustainable employability, they can always reach out to me, because we need all the experts in the world that we can have, of course.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing these sessions in terms of building awareness. You come from the background that you described, your interests. is unique, I think, relative to other members of the group, sort of in this demographic space of the standard, and in particular things like wellness and aging. So maybe if you could just start by giving us an overview of how you see standards enhancing things like demographic inclusion and aging in particular.
Yeah, sure. So because of research I did around the older people, and then looking at sustainable employability. At the same time, there was a movement going from the British Standards Institute to set up an Aging Societies technical committee.
Right.
So I was involved in setting that one up in 2017-18, and drew Australia in by writing a proposal for Australia to join. And so for me, it comes from the heart to work on an aging workforce standards, to make, the quality of life and the quality of work better for our aging people, because it's clear that, the workforce is getting older, the average age is increasing. And I believe that if we develop standards and they are implemented by the right organizations and the right people, that ultimately it leads to the betterment of everybody, companies, people, and the world, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with you in a second on and just preempting the question by saying, how do we change people's mindset about aging? And I'm going to preface it with its personal story. Is I go back to when I was a student in Canada, just about to graduate with my bachelor's degree. And I remember going for a job interview. And one of the things I was starting to learn when I looked across the border, and in this case, the biggest border to Canada is the United States. And it was interesting at that time, because at that time, Canada had a law that allowed sort of forced retirement at 65.
Yeah.
Companies could force you to retire. And in learning international HR and different cultural elements, looking south of the border, I came to learn that in the United States, that was illegal, right? It was illegal to discriminate based on age. So here's these two countries that a lot of people assume have quite a bit in common. And that to me was a real fundamental difference.
Yeah,
and I remember going to a job interview once and being asked sort of a question of, where do you see things in the future? And one of my comments was, well, I think Canada's going to get rid of its law about forced retirement because it's discriminatory. And this person interviewing me was like, where did that come from? And it was, and it was just coming to the passion of the HR person, is saying, I just think the models of work are changing. And this is 25 years ago. And I'm sure the 25-year-olds today probably think even more so the models of remote work and global nomads and all of this type of thing. So coming full circle back to my question to you, how do we change this inherited stereotype that we have, that 65, or pick your number, 62, or depending on your jurisdiction, 60, that, hey, all of a sudden people cross this line and everything's changed. One day before that, you were an able-bodied, constructive employee. The day after that, it's time to go home. How do we change that mindset?
So I think that mindset is actually already changing, because we have to,
Yes.
Retirement age was implemented in, early 1900s when people didn't turn 65. So we know that one. We have got an increasing number of people that will continue to work. So I think from a mindset point of view, it's easier for the higher educated people and the people that don't have a physically demanding job to remain at work. So what we're seeing, of course, is that those groups are more likely to stay at work compared to the more manual and physically demanding jobs.
Right.
But yeah, so what I think is that a standard in itself can be used to, like I said before, improve the quality of life and the quality of work for older people as well. if we look at countries like Thailand and China, for example, who are also involved with developing the aging workforce standards, they will use it, to communicate with their governments, for example. You might know that China is talking about or proposing to lift their retirement age as well. So I think the standards that we are developing, will inform not just countries, like Australia or Canada, but across the globe. And I think that way, again, we can improve things for people across the globe. And that's actually my why, to be honest. If you ask me about why do I do this, that's why I do it. And I think another way to improve or change the mindset is, so I've had a meeting with one of our state governments, and they were very keen to see the finalized product, because what they want to do is use the standard potentially, and this is very preliminary, but if they would, for example, get suppliers or contractors to work for this government, to then say, look, what are you doing in the aging sector? So it's a bit like, how people try to address gender imbalance.
Right.
That's something, and I think that's something that ISO TC260 could think about is, try to talk to the governments in respective countries where our group is active, to see if there's some sort of link that can be made with the supply chain or the contractors that they work with.
Makes a lot of sense to me. And as you were talking, I'm thinking about two examples I've had in my life where, the construct of workforce and age really were disconnected. One is my own father, who's still with us. And, he did the right thing. He was a salaryman, a 30-year employee, and retired at, I think he retired a year early, 64. Yeah. And even at that time, I remember thinking, this guy's got so much to give. Why in the world would the organization and the society actually say, it's time for you to move on? And, this is 35 years ago. It's just crazy to me to think about that as societies. And this is what you said, something that really got me thinking, because I live in a part of the world where, interestingly enough, we have a very different demographic pyramid, right? We have a demographic dividend whereby the vast majority, it's a fat middle pyramid, right? There's more young people than old people or children. So the mindset of the society is not even thinking about issues related to aging, and they should be. When you look at Europe and you look at government pensions and we obviously, the COVID has been such a focus globally, but you go back just a couple of years ago and some of the protests that were happening in France and changing the retirement age and things like this. And, the HR practitioner in me is saying, this isn't something that we should really be compromising on, because I see win-win-win, in terms of this. I realize there's financial implications. But the second part of my example was in my second HR job, a gentleman retired, I think he might have retired a bit early too, 63, said, oh, I've been waiting for this forever, went out, started playing golf, and he had a heart attack. And he was gone. And the other side of me, as the practitioner, says, is this model of wellness that we build, this mindset. It's kind of like the suburban mentality, where we sort of, in the 50s and 60s, we created this idea that people would go out in the suburbs, there would be malls in the suburbs, and you would travel once you retire. And this I think people should travel when they're young, not when they get older. It's harder to travel when you're older, so, and your example, although you and I both know, I think it's even worth saying, that the construct of the age of retirement from Germany was based on the statistic that the vast majority of people didn't live past 65. Exactly, so there was no financial obligation to that. And yet we've created these models that have lasted over 100 years and created this mindset. So I'm pleasantly surprised to hear, you know, from your expertise that you think the mindset is changing. Here's my next question. How does a standard, what are some of the specifics in a standard that can help, you know, the goals that we're talking about right now? I'm getting into sort of the technical granular details, but I'm curious, you know, how does a standard help address inclusion as it relates to ageism, for example?
Thank you for that question. So by the end of the year, we will have this aging workforce standards that I talked about. So, you know, there's about 15 or 16 countries involved to ensure we've got the, you know, the inclusion aspect and diversity across the globe. So just to tell you a little bit about what's in that standard to achieve an age-inclusive workforce is, so we start with leadership and age-inclusive organizational culture. So how, you know, it starts at the top, how do we change that culture? We've got a list of principles that
Nice.
we will work by. Okay, and then we've got a section which focuses on, I would like to call it retirement side. So it looks at retirement transitions. How do you continue in the workforce when you're older? But also one that was brought up by Thailand in particular was around communities. So so it's a different cultural aspects compared to, let's say, a westernized country. But for example, in Thailand, you know, you've got a larger informal workforce consisting of older people, but they contribute a lot to the productivity of a country. So and for me, that was an eye-opener to learn about that. So it was very important to reflect, you know, the contribution of that older informal workforce as well within that standard. So it might be a little bit hard sometimes for people to think about that, but there's ways of including that informal workforce in the formal workforce through, you know, for example, getting the people in to teach the younger generation things that, you know, they're not familiar with yet. And so the other one that we're big on, obviously, is intergenerational collaboration.
Right.
Because there's more and more evidence, as you might know, that will improve the productivity and the understanding and the sharing. So it's not just about knowledge transfer. It's also about, you know, working together and breaking down the barriers and understanding each other. One other aspect that I think is particularly specific to this standard is around dementia. Dementia will become more prevalent as we go on, and early onset or young onset dementia is happening. So the more we can get the word out about that, and, you know, we've given some recommendations around what organizations can do if that would occur. And then we've got the more, you know, straightforward HR side of things, you know, around workforce planning, recruitment and retention, knowledge management. And so we give some recommendations around how you, what you can do to make that more age inclusive. And then we've got a few topics that I call sit in the middle of our thinking, which is around digitalization and innovation, and work design, health and well-being, and financial literacy. And those are the main ones. And then we've got some stuff talk about, okay, so what are the assessment tools? We give some examples of metrics that are linked back to 30414. We've got a section for small businesses. And this is then where we started to talk about, we went through a very lengthy process of identifying our top 20 recommendations to make it easy to get started with implementing a standard, because I think the problem often is there's so much that you don't know where to get started, and if you don't, you know, want to do it all. So what we did was we did some quite complicated, you know, research methodologies around identifying what are the true basic ones that are deemed the most important to be implemented, with also keeping in mind that the smaller businesses should be able to do that.
Yeah.
So we've got this list of 20 recommendations, and we've just been successful in changing from a guideline to a guideline and requirements document, which will mean that our recommendations, those 20, most likely, we are still working on that and still discussing that, will become requirements instead of the top 20, recommendations. But we're, like I said, we're working on that, and that will be published, as I said, by the end of the year. So watch that space. But that's briefly, what that standard is about.
No, I think that's great, and thank you for sharing sort of a more technical answer, because I think in this type of area, for people who aren't sort of either directly impacted or based on where they're working, the industry they're in, it may not be on their immediate horizon. But then you have other parts of the world where this is a pressing issue, and inclusivity on so many dimensions is I don't want to discount it. It's a hot topic. It's a hot topic because of, it has a real impact, in terms of your culture, in terms of your, and again, the broader term is the sustainable workforce that you referred to earlier. So one of the questions I've been asking a lot of people is, if you go ahead, say 2 years from now, looking back, what would be some of the success stories that would demonstrate that what you've been doing, what you've been working in, the groups that you've been working with, are having an impact? So it's a vision question. How would you 2 years from now be able to affirm that some of the goals that you've set for yourself, your team objectives, are being materialized?
That is interesting. So I think I thought about it a little bit. I think what I would like to see is that there's actually support for the not-for-profit sector, hopefully by governments, to implement standards, because it's not always necessarily the easiest way. People don't know about it. So there needs to be a lot of awareness raising. There needs a lot of, hand-holding, a lot of education needs to follow, and then there probably also needs to be support on how to implement it into practice.
Right.
And I think governments play a crucial role in that. So I really hope that all the governments in the world are listening today and will go, oh, Sabrina's right. Let's go and delve into that, and let's go and help ISO standards people to make this a reality, because ultimately, like I said, the standards are there for the betterment of the people. It's not, to make things negative. And I haven't said this before, but there is some evidence from research from the UK and also from France and Germany that the use of standards has actually improved the performance of organizations or businesses. For example, they might be able to export more because they have followed particular standards. So it just opens up a whole new world.
I've seen something similar, I think, on our HCM Impact website as well, and pointing to Canada, for example, in terms of the net GDP benefit to standards. It's been quantified before, and I think there'll be more of that research, which leads well to sort of my next question is, whether it's in the area of the TC or the 30414 or demographics and aging, do you have any resources, websites or other organizations that you might want to mention in case people are looking and finding more information about this?
Yeah, so obviously the UN Capital, so the HCM-impact.com and we have a LinkedIn group. So I think people should Google 30414 and find our LinkedIn group and join us so you can stay up to date. I think that's a good one to follow. I'm also with a smaller group of this larger group. We are developing a certification process around 30414, and the website for that is globalhrstandards.com. It's a very simple global hrstandards.com. So if you want to know more information, the people are listed on there. And yeah, so we're looking forward to actually rolling out our first module, like an introduction on 30414, and also workforce data quality, which is a standard that has been accepted in Australia, and is now going to international level as well, under leadership of Neil McCormick. So, but yeah, so that will talk about workforce data quality and human capital reporting. So I think that's very exciting. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I looked at the HCM Impact LinkedIn page just yesterday, and our audience, you know, our analytics, the number one market that's looking at that website right now is coming from Australia.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we are doing our best.
No, and I think it's credit to
That's
people
funny.
like you and Neil and others that are getting the word out in the market. So, you know, I think that's a wonderful statistic to sort of point to. And I was talking to Nikolai doing this the other day, and asking a bit about the history and, you know, how it is. And it kind of relates to the discussion you and I were having before we started recording in terms of different regions and their alignment with the notion of standards and the understanding of entities like ISO and others. And he made the point that there was a very healthy competition between the regions on this project about who could sort of bring their best game to this. And that healthy competition is such a good thing in research, in academics, in industry, in all these different areas. And it's indicative of the maturing nature, I would say, of the HR profession. So I think it's one of the reasons why people like yourself, myself, and others are really excited and emotionally connected to what this group is doing, is because it is such a healthy, constructive addition to the knowledge and wisdom related to people work.
Yeah, I think you know, because I was trying to think back about how did I get involved with Raise the Tide group, and so I was actually in Berlin at the time, and one of my working group members on aging workforce knew Hilger, and so he said, maybe talk to Hilger, and so I met up with Hilger, and it was good to talk, and he mentioned Raise the Tide, and I just said, yeah, I'll join. And, you know, I didn't really know what to expect because I wasn't involved in the setup of the standard itself. So I'd call myself a newbie from that point of view. But I believe in, you know, benchmarking and data and things like that. So I thought, yeah, this is interesting, and I'll see, you know, what they do. And I think how I'd like to see myself, and this is what I actually want to say to other people that are listening to this call today, is that even if you think it's not for you, just come and have a look and join and listen and read and see what you think, because I think followership, you know, from the human factors field, I think is really important, is that we all, you know, have a common goal that we want to move towards to. And, you know, the followership sounds negative, but I'm actually really proud of it, because I think what it does is it raises the bar, it increases the support for us to, you know, make ISO 30414 go worldwide. So the followership, from my point of view, needs to increase. So please, if you don't feel confident, or if you're not sure, or come and have a look, or reach out to us, or reach out to me if you like, and we can grow the network, and we can all learn from each other from that point of view.
And wonderful comment. If I could just add, you know, literally add to what you're saying, is we want as a group to expand this network in a very inclusive way. And there is a bias so far of these early adopters, you, me, others, is we tend to be more technically orientated. research orientated, numbers orientated. That doesn't mean that, you know, those are mutually exclusive to the human aspects. You know, you mentioned human factors. We're talking about aging and demographics. These are all by definition human issues. But I think people who understand the role and the positioning of standards and the value that it can add to improve, to be more equitable, to be more inclusive, to remove inappropriate biases and subjectivity. These are all things that are possible, you know, and aspirational in terms of the standards. So we're in our final minute. Sabrina, any final thoughts or issues that you wanted to mention, perhaps, that we didn't have a chance to mention in our discussion so far?
Yeah, what I would like to say is that if people are skeptical about standards, I would suggest you go and look at the evidence. I've been doing a little bit of looking around at the impact of certification of environmental management systems, for example, in particular industries, in particular countries. They do improve business performance, and they can improve awareness, they can build new markets. So I think come and have a look and see what you can gain.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful way to conclude our session. I want to thank you for sharing your background, sharing your thoughts, sharing your wisdom to the group. And I want to encourage, you know, like you are, people to become involved. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the session. Thank you again to Sabrina for joining us from Australia, and encourage people to watch these and other sessions that we'll be doing in the future. So for now, goodbye from Dubai.
See ya.
Cheers.